Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Folashade Ambrose Medebem, Communication, Public Affairs and Sustainable Development Director. Thank you all for joining us for the inaugural session of Lafarge Africa's Concrete Ideas webinar series with the theme, Public-Private Partnership, Approaches to Rapidly Upscaling Nigeria's Economic Infrastructure. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link with you after the event, and we welcome you to visit the content yourself and also share with your colleagues. We also invite your comments and questions. Please refer to the Q&A chat box on your screen. And if you think of a question for our speakers at any point, just type it in thereafter and our moderator will pose it to our speakers during the Q&A segment. I hereby hand over to our esteemed chairman, Mr. Adebode Adefioye. The floor is yours, sir. So we've been having a few technical difficulties, and so we'll just give it a few moments. In the meantime, I would like to welcome all of you again and invite our CEO, Khalid El-Dakani, please, to have the floor. Khalid? Sorry, we're just having a few technical difficulties. Khalid?
I'm back. I'm very sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Our chairman will join us very shortly. So the floor is yours, Khalid, please.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Your Honourable Minister, it's a great honor to have you with us today. I'm sorry for the internet connection problems. I'm replacing our chairman, Adi, but I'll give him the floor once he'll be able to join. But with all the duly protocol observed, you're more than welcome to join us and be our guest of honor today. I'm most delighted to welcome you to the inaugural session of our Concrete Ideas webinar, series with the theme of Public-Private Partnership Approaches to Rapidly Upscaling Nigeria's Economic Infrastructure. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our special guest of honor, the Honourable Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, for making out time to personally attend this inaugural session, and to all our distinguished thought leaders and participants. Concrete Ideas, after today's inaugural session, will become a quarterly platform for strategic discussions of critical and topic issues in the area of construction and other sections of its value. The platform embodies all Lafarge Africa thought leadership interventions and is poised to become a catalyst for the attainment of sustainable change, continuous improvement, and commercial success within the sector. During today's session, for which we are delighted to have global thought leaders, as well as wide array of professionals and associations in the construction value chain, starting from civil engineers to real estate developers and architects, will share their great insights. The Concrete Ideas webinar series is quietly timely, as you are all aware. The global pandemic COVID-19 has put a lot of pressure on the economy and has changed the way we live our lives. You will agree that the socioeconomic uncertainties and the disruptions of the pandemic came at a sustainable cost to the Nigerian economy. And these discussions are to help us chart a new course to rebuild the economy and move forward. We are reassuring our commitment to contributing towards nation building, and this platform will no doubt serve that purpose. Once again, I'm grateful to the Honourable Minister, all our esteemed thought leaders, all participants, as well as members of Lafarge Africa team. I therefore welcome everyone to this very insightful engagement. With this, I hand over to Lafarge Holcim, Head of Middle East and Africa Regional President, Miljan Gotovic, to give his keynote address. Miljan?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all healthy, well, and safe. Greetings from rainy Switzerland. It is my privilege to be part of this event, to participate in this very important discussion on how to scale up infrastructure through public-private partnership. It is a timely discussion given the fact that Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa, and also it is a growing country that is in need of infrastructure projects. Today, I would like to share with you my experience working with Lafarge Holcim, who happens to be the world's leading building material company. I also would like to listen and learn from you and also share Nigerian practices across Africa and Middle East. Lafarge Holcim works with many decision makers. We work with local citizens, we work with governments, with construction companies to build towns and cities in over 80 countries worldwide. We employ more than 70,000 people, and our goal is not just to sell the products, but to provide tailor-made solutions that will make cities more compact, more sustainable, and better connected. So we are not only building material supplier, we provide experts and expertise in the design stage, in financial planning, and we do have experts in our company to tackle environmental and sustainability challenges we face in today's world. Working with 80 countries worldwide, we have gathered a lot of expertise and experience that we can share from country to country or even from continent to continent. I'm very glad to tell you that Lafarge Holcim, for instance, supplied a tailor-made cement that was used in Eco-Atlantic City development in Lagos. This cement has the unique mechanical and physical properties to achieve high durability in highly aggressive environment. Our history goes back 100+ years in infrastructure. We've been participating in construction of Suez in 1864. And if you do a quick check on our company website, you can see that we have been active in public-private partnership projects all over the world, in transportation, oil and gas, power and utilities, and the list goes on and on. Over the years, we have developed specialist products and services to construct roads, bridges, tunnels, military facilities, power installation, and our products have been tested and accepted on 5 continents. Our clients, therefore, they profit from our global experience, and we can deliver projects which meet the needs of the citizens at the most reasonable cost, on time, and of course with technical integrity and durability assured. We are constantly striving to provide new, innovative products. LafargeHolcim has over 1,500 patents worldwide, which is a clear testimony to our capacity to supply the most appropriate products and services to our customers, to our partners. What we need to do more is to keep discussing and sharing is how to create the policies that unlock the millions of dollars we need to build the cities that have the infrastructure that create economic opportunities for millions of its citizens. I have been learning also from Nigeria. I have discovered that our Honourable Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Fashola, has initiated a new innovative road infrastructure tax credit scheme, which allows firms to use their funds to build roads and offset against their income tax liability. I think this is a perfect form of public-private partnership many other developing countries should adopt and should at least consider. Currently, nearly $100 million was invested by the private sector on public infrastructure in 2019 and in low and middle income countries. With further improvements in policies and new initiatives, Nigeria will attract more investments in the years to come. And speaking on behalf of LafargeHolcim Middle East and Africa, which I had, we are willing to participate in this journey and share our experience from 5 continents, from 80 countries, from 70,000 of our employees with you. Once again, thank you for invitation.
Thank you very much, Miljan. Khalid, I would like to invite Honourable Minister.
And now, Honourable Minister, we are so thoughtful and eager to listen to yourself and the insights you're going to provide us with today. We are really looking forward, and it's our great honor. Please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, whichever part of the world and what time zone you find yourself. I'd like to start by commending the Lafarge Group for this initiative. It is most welcome. It is very timely, and I also like to express my appreciation for the invitation to participate in the inaugural version of Concrete Ideas and the theme that it speaks to about the private partnership approaches to scaling up Nigeria's infrastructure. I think that in most, if not all, of President Buhari's New Year Day addresses and budget speeches, the underlying current of consistency is his commitment to renew, rebuild, and increase the stock of Nigeria's infrastructure. Go back the last 5 years, and it is clear that there is a gap to fill. But I think before we begin to talk of the possible methods inclusive of PPPs, which is one of the issues that Concrete Ideas wants to interrogate, is for us to have a common understanding first. Because I think if our understanding of the facts are the same, then it is easy to build consensus about the choices that we make. And so those are the things I would like to speak more to. And the first thing is that there is nothing wrong with Nigeria. And Nigeria did not have an infrastructure gap because something is innately wrong with Nigeria. It happened because Nigeria stopped investing sufficiently in infrastructure, unlike her competitors. The investment dropped, the population grew, the economy grew, but the framework to support the successful and efficient operation of infrastructure dropped. So the last consistent undertaking of infrastructure happened in the early 70s, towards the end of that decade, where we were building essentially all over the country. The port expansion, road expansion, bridges. So we must go back to something similar to that. That is what our competitors, China, Turkey, India, everybody has done. Investing a sizable proportion of their GDP in their infrastructure stock. So it's not as if we have sinned. We have made bad policy decisions. This administration understands it, wants to change it, and therefore requires the resources. And this is where I will segue to the options that private capital offers. And to say that PPPs certainly form a part of the government financing and development plan, without a doubt. And if any confirmation was needed, the Infrastructure Concession and Regulatory Commission, the ICRC, which is an institutional framework, confirms that yes, the government of Nigeria has a commission in place. That commission didn't exist out of the blues. It existed as part of a conscious need to provide a warehouse to develop PPPs, develop business cases and models and financial modeling, and also then negotiate transactions. And that institution is a creature of an act of parliament. So it is rooted in legislative foundations as well. And then I go then to, for me, what the realities of today is. Again, so we cannot discuss PPPs without a very sharp and keen eye on what today's global economic reality is. I think it is that reality that will frame the context not only of our discussions, but also what we should expect. If we talk in isolation of the economy, global and local, then perhaps our expectations may not be properly calibrated. And so I will speak to, first, my understanding of PPPs. And I like to talk at street level so that everybody just gets a sense, no, not too much technical terms. And we're just speaking, when we're talking about PPPs, we're essentially talking about investment. We're talking about resources. We're talking about availability of capital and the mobility of capital. Is capital ready to move in today's economy? What I see is that most parts of the world are in recession or in survival mode today. I don't know what will happen in January next year. So whose capital is ready to move where now as we speak? So, but we can speak of what happened before and what we expect to happen. But this is my understanding of today. How many people? Because what I see across the world are governments trying to save their private sector. And Nigeria is not exempted from that. So we're seeing central banks, parliament, government giving out support, giving out relief, giving out incentives to keep the private sector going. That's today's reality. And but what is instructive is that in spite of what I see as private sector struggling, global difficult economic climate, the good news for me is that the PPPs that we have negotiated and that we have commenced are still being undertaken. So we have the tax credit scheme being used to construct the Bodoboni Bridge in Rivers State and funded by the NLNG. We have the tax credit scheme being used by the Dangote Group on the Obajana-Kaba Highway and the Apapa-Urushoki bridges. Given the economic realities that I have presented to you, I think it is a sign of success that those PPPs are still viable, they are still going concerns. This is not the story with some PPPs across the world. Their realities and their dynamics have changed. So for me, this is a sign of confidence that we still have, we are keeping what we have. Some have lost what they had as a result of COVID. And that for me is how I measure where we are. I can also share with you the other options on the table, also from tax credit schemes, which are the Agbara-Aton Highway, which the Flour Mills Group expressed interest to use the tax credit scheme into the Agbara estate. Again, that's going through the necessary regulatory processes and procurement. And also the Kaduna Western Bypass that the Dangote Group is also still expressing appetite with the Kaduna State government. Of course, recently, the ministry has unveiled the Highway Development Management Initiative, what the acronym of which is the HDMI. What we're offering there is an opportunity either to complete and maintain or to maintain and manage roughly 2,000 kilometers of federal highway network across Nigeria as a start. That represents just about 6% of our 35,000 kilometer network. But let me quickly speak and to say that what it offers is not just highway pavement management, it offers the opportunity to complete existing roads that have not been completed or to manage those that have been completed. It offers opportunity for signage, for lane marking, for rest house and catering, for ambulance services, for tolling services, and vehicle towing services as well. It also offers opportunities for fresh farm produce so as to take away farmers whose products are just displayed by the shoulder of the road into a much more bespoke environment situated within maybe a rest house or a highway fresh farm produce. So there's so much that is offered there, and the procurement process is developing. There has been a lot of appetite and interest shown, and we're looking at how our last interface with key stakeholders were addressing issues of risk management, risk sharing, and confidence building. Now, this takes me to the conversation I think we should have in the public space. There is an assumption out there based on perhaps a lack of knowledge about how PPPs work. There's an assumption out there about policymakers and those who benefit from policies that, oh, once you just declare that PPPs are going to happen, they will happen just by the declaration. And there's an assumption out there also that, oh, if government gave everything to the private sector has the resources to do everything. I don't think that that assumption is true. I don't think that that assumption is well-founded. And I say this for many reasons. The first of which is that we must understand the differences between government objective and private objective. I have believed, and I still believe, that private sector and government make profits, but I believe that they account for their profits in different ways. For the private sector, it is the value of dividend often available to respond to shareholders and their balance sheet. For government, they have shareholders too, the people. But in the way that the profit of government is measured is in the general well-being and happiness of its people and its prosperity. And I think if we keep this at the back of our minds, we will then understand that there is a distinction that must be drawn between social infrastructure assets and commercial infrastructure assets. And commercial infrastructure assets are the ones that often the private sector seeks to participate more willingly and readily in. And I will come to it as I come to the end of my intervention. And the social assets must continuously be borne by government and funded by government. So I will give two broad examples. It is less likely that you will see private sector being interested in building a runway in an airport, as you will see them more interested in building the terminal building where commercial, letting, shops, retail can take place. That is one distinction. It is often the case also that it is less likely that you will see private capital moving to build rail infrastructure, the ballast and the rail. You will see those are 100-year assets, and you won't find 100-year money. But you will see them more likely interested in financing the rolling stock, putting advertisement inside the coaches and around the station. That is where you are likely to see private sector. And you are likely to see them also around hospitals and those type of things, and less likely on roads. And if you look at the world over, the maximum you will see in most jurisdictions, whether it's Asia, Europe, America, South America, that you will see is roughly about 30–40% private capital in roads. 60% of it are government funded. And I think we must have this understanding. Now, coming closer to the point, to perhaps demonstrate the point. How many members of the private sector have the balance sheet to finance infrastructure that runs into hundreds of billions of naira? Let us dimension first the local economy, largely driven by MSMEs. So about 80% of it is MSMEs. And the same is true of UK, Europe, well over 60, 70% MSMEs. So the people who play in this sector are not a lot. And I think that education and that conversation must be broadly shared and agreed. And therefore, you will see that, as I've said, we have kept the private sector deals that we have closed. We have also had a continuation of the annual sukuk, which is private capital coming in to fund the gap that budget and treasury cannot keep. So the sukuk has grown from 100 billion 3 years ago to, I think, 120 billion in the second year. And this year it was 162 billion. Indeed, it was subscribed to the tune of 600 billion, but because of budgetary constraints, we could only take 162 billion. So that just shows you indicatively what the appetite in that area also is. But whilst we keep what we have, I can also tell you that in the last few weeks, even in spite of COVID, we have closed some deals. They were not initiated during COVID. They were initiated long before COVID. And I give you examples of the deal closed with the Ministry of Interior and the Correctional Services Institution, the prisons, getting a private sector deal to build and operate a shoe factory in Aba and a leather tannery and processing facility in Kano to provide all the supply needs for shoes and leather for the correctional services, the Nigerian Civil Defense Corporation, and allied bodies. That deal was approved in Federal Executive Council, I think about a week or two ago. Again, as I said, the process started a couple of months back. Then there was also a deal by the Customs Service, also with another private group, again, not initiated during COVID, but closing during COVID and in spite of COVID, for another private group to finance the deployment of, I can't remember the exact number now, of mobile scanners at all the nation's border posts. And this is not just to facilitate security, but also to finance, to facilitate efficient revenue collection. Again, you can see the commercial side behind those two deals. Of course, I think about 2 weeks ago, the government, through the Ministry of Transportation, also announced the agreement to construct a rail line from, I believe, Kano to the border town of Maradi, Niger, which has generated some controversy for its own. But what underpins it is that it's an EPC contract where the contractor is going to raise the finance on the back of a sovereign guarantee. Again, a hybrid of a partnership with private sector. So to the extent that in spite of COVID, those deals are still closing. For me, the glass is fuller than it is empty, and it perhaps provide the circumstantial environment to begin a conversation under the aegis of concrete ideas about how to deepen and improve on this kind of transactions. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. The Honourable Minister. Despite the weakness of technological infrastructure, I might not be able to join in good time to actually introduce you, which I think you deserve. And it is with pleasure that I welcome everybody here, especially Mr. Frank Aibogu, because the way I'm about to start, really, it might extend this by like 5 minutes, but I think it's still the proper thing to do, to welcome the minister. This is the second time I'm speaking to him. The very first time, it was face-to-face, and I doubt whether he remembers. I'm going to tell a short story, and this story is very apt, and it describes the reason why having Bismarck here, having Bolaji here, having Lamis here, really. I think really this is the best of us. It is people that progress the society. For people to progress the society, they must think, they must cooperate. I was with Bismarck in a room one day, and he was able to predict what was going to happen exactly 18 months ahead. And he did it to exactness. Sometimes in June 2007, at a cocktail event to welcome a governor into office, there was a gathering of distinguished persons. As he walked the room, he came upon 4 individuals and the conversation ensued, probing pertinent questions. But one that seemed to be most impactful was his question: what do you think is most important for this state? What would you do if you were the governor? One of the 4 answers: combat armed robberies. Armed robbers have offices in Lagos. He was aghast. There are hot spots in Lagos. It was pointed at. It was pointed to him, and the points were identified. Astonishingly, on the 12th of June, exactly 7 days after, 5 days after, it was in the newspaper that Muslim Smith Commission on Security had been instituted. On the dot of 7 days, all those locations were taken over, and there was not one robbery in those spots throughout his tenure. The reason I bring this out is that when you go to a Lubiri and you see all the places that are sports positions, he might have had the idea before, but I am telling you that I'm witness to how Babatunde Fashola, Honourable Minister, and he deserves Honourable to be put in front of his name. When we have Bismarck here, we have the minister here, we have Lamis here, we have Bolaji here, we really can make things happen. And I say with full confidence, really, that Lafarge is not wasting time. We need to concretize things. We need a cooperation of somebody like you in office who spend hours and time and money to make sure that together we get something done. I think really this is the import of all of us sitting here. And it is with great pleasure that I welcome Babatunde Fashola, the Honourable Minister of Works. Lamis, on his everything that's been circulated, I serve under him, so he's my boss, as chairman of Itana PLC. I don't think Bolaji Balogun needs any introduction. And the man who makes our economy tick, I think is the brightest man really around when we are talking about economic matters. Bismarck, with great pleasure. Bolaji Balogun is my boss, was my chairman, so I don't know what accolade to use to welcome him. I raise my hands and I welcome everybody, and just let's have a beautiful discussion. And we should open doors to make sure that this really happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me once again join in welcoming our distinguished keynote speaker, the Honourable Minister of Works and Housing, and I hope I can also say my very good friend. We expect to have a very engaging conversation this afternoon. And I will be starting by asking the Honourable Minister a few questions, and thereafter we would have a conversation by our panel. I'm sure that as Minister, I no longer have need to send text messages to the Minister about my Okada experiences, but that is for another day, Honourable Minister. Let's come to today's conversation. And I like the way you set the tone for the conversation. And you spoke about the experience in the early 70s when, as it was, Nigeria was building virtually everywhere and making investment in building infrastructure. What you say has changed, and I agree with you, is that we stopped making investment in any level close to that magnitude to build infrastructure. And so over the years and over the decades, we have accumulated significant infrastructure deficit, which now haunts us as a country. My first question, Honourable Minister, will be that, as you know, in the light of the pandemic and the significant fall in oil prices, and as a result, government revenues, the government is now looking at a broader mix in terms of source of funding for infrastructure. And my question would be, what is the place for PPP in that mix that the government is considering today, especially in the light of the economic sustainability program of the government?
Okay, if you look at if you reflect rather on what I have said, PPPs have a continuing place in government's developmental and financial strategy. Because first and foremost, we are operating a deficit budget. We have been for some time, and the capital side of it is usually funded by debt, which has raised some concern, and with expectation also that some private investment will come to take up the space. But as I said in my opening remarks, everything is relative and contextual. What is the world looking like today? In what part of the world is there an abundance of capital that is ready to move? In what part of the world is the private sector doing very well that wants to expand? What you see in most parts of the world today are governments leading to save their private sector. So, whilst that is happening, we are expecting, and that was why I was sharing as I closed some of the deals that we have concluded. That in spite of COVID, those deals could have failed. Many sectors have collapsed. Many plans for expansion in other areas of business across the world have either now been put on hold or have been recalibrated. Many business lines have changed even what they are producing and have gone into something entirely new. That we could keep those deals and conclude them says something encouraging about the nature of the transaction, the confidence in Nigeria, and the confidence about our procurement process. But that said, oil revenues are no longer what they used to be. The choice again is to ask, assuming that we decided on a taxing policy, who are you going to tax? Businesses that are struggling. And therefore, we must now do what some others before us have done, which is to borrow, because we missed an opportunity. And this is not looking back, but it is to contextualize. At the time before, we had $12 billion in 2005. This infrastructure gap was there. as a country, we chose to pay creditors, settle our Paris Club debt. That was a policy decision. We could have invested, and I say, if the decision were mine to make that, I will invest the money in the infrastructure in the hope that I will accelerate productivity, growth, and from the revenues and productivity, I will reschedule and finance those debts, because we have gone back to contract the same debt that we were scared of. So again, perhaps in closing, is to then say that yes, it looks easy from the outside, and I think you should have many more people who have worn these shoes to have this conversation, because it is experiential. It is really experiential. It's a choice to make. And so if you look at what the United Kingdom is doing, United States is doing, all of the governments of the world, they're essentially trying first to save their economies. The economic sustainability plan, in terms of what role the private sector can play there, let us unpack it. One, it seeks to finance agri so that we can have a food sustainability and food security plan, because we don't want to be in a position where our imports on food is increasing. It should be decreasing. Otherwise, we will not have the foreign exchange revenues to finance food imports. So that's one thing it focuses on: early distribution of seedlings to farmers and inputs and extension services. It also focuses on the weak and the vulnerable and the urban poor. So it's trying to create 774,000 temporary jobs. It's also focusing on rescheduling loan obligations for MSMEs, small businesses, through the central bank. So their loans that were falling due have been rescheduled. Interest rates in some cases have been brought down. It is directly intervening in some sectors, in healthcare, some industries, and it is also providing payroll support. In my ministry, what we are trying to do, one of the first people who came back to work were the construction workers. Immediately there was an ease of lockdown so that we could service the urban poor. And those urban poor are the people who get paid on a daily basis, because they were the hardest hit by the lockdown. So these are some of the basic components of the economic sustainability. And one cannot dismiss the role that private sector itself has played in supporting government efforts to manage the impact of COVID. The COVID and its achievements have been well reported and documented. So this is a partnership through crisis first, before it evolves into a partnership through to development. If you don't defeat the virus, we won't have an economy of the type that we want. That is my understanding.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. We will come back to the matter of movement of capital in my last and third question. But let me just go ahead and ask the second one. Nigeria's highest profile PPP project, the Lekki Expressway, was commissioned while you were governor of Lagos State. What insights can you share with the audience in terms of your experience in betting such a significant PPP project that virtually every time I hear people talk about PPP has become the reference point?
Well, there are many insights, and one of the first ones I'd like to share is part of what I'd alluded to. When some people, I must say, think that, oh, once it's PPP, it's like a switch bulb. It's going to happen quickly. It's not quite that true, because I can share with people now that the agreement to the concession agreement was signed in 2002 when I was chief of staff. We didn't reach financial close until 2010. No, let me take that back. It was 2005 when the concession agreement was signed, not 2000. 2005. Between 2002 and 2005, we were scoping the project. We were gathering the team. The investors were bringing and looking for who was going to be interested. From the Macquarie Group to the South African pension funds and all of that. They were defining the risks. We were meeting the landowners. Lawyers were working in the background. At the end of the day, there were almost 100 different sets of professionals involved, representing different groups. There were 9 banks involved. There were transaction advisors. There were so many professionals involved. So it doesn't happen like a light switch because everybody is protecting his interests. And that was what led to the inauguration of the Lagos PPP office, because I found myself as governor entirely consumed by negotiation, almost on a weekly basis, negotiating about 60 people, turning page. And I said, this can't work. So we created an office. And the head of PPP then, we had to break our wage structure in order to bring in from private sector. It was earning almost double what I was earning as governor. I had to go to the House of Assembly. That look, is either you waste my own executive time or we pay this man well so that we can close this deal. So these are some of the lessons. So these things don't just happen because we say PPP. There's a lot behind. There are dozens of agreements running into hundreds of pages that have to be negotiated, signed, everybody protecting his or her interests and all. And we must then understand also that policy actions have consequences. So we have seen contracts, investments suddenly canceled. So the investors were saying, well, you know, we're talking to you, this government today. What if another government comes and cancels this thing? If we build a road, we can't carry the road away. How do we get our money? So we want a federal support agreement. Again, that became subject of politics. So these things we must find a way to exclude it from politics. So the administration of the day in 2005 at the federal level said, no, we won't give you a federal support agreement. You are opposition. There was no other reason, because federal support agreement just required them to say, okay, if Lagos State government defaults, Lagos State should sign an ISPO, we will deduct from their monthly FAC, which we did. There was no other condition necessary to be met. It was just politics. But it was President Yar'Adua of blessed memory now who said, this is absolute nonsense. You need this, let's go and sign it. And he authorized it. That was when we reached financial close. Between then and when we reached financial close, Lagos State government had to borrow money to start the project, even though we had a concession agreement in place. And these are matters of enlightenment and education, because the fact that you have a concession agreement itself doesn't mean you can raise money. So, and in between that, government has 4 years to deliver results. And you will see, and I don't mean this in a tongue-in-the-cheek way, in a recent election, they were calling a governor, MOU governor, because he hasn't closed. So our people must understand that these things take time. And there's not a lot of it that you can do in a term of 4 years or 8 years. And in between all of that, government must spend. That is the social side. And then when one political party threatens that we will cancel the agreement, you are raising the risk for the investor. And it's going to find all sorts of ways to ensure that it doesn't end up with the short end of the stick. Finally, we must also accept and understand that once private sector is playing within the parameters of the entire commercial space that includes CPI, purchasing index, exchange rate, inflation rate, interest rate. That's where private sector is playing. So when it got to a time, the Lekki concessionaire said, well, you know, exchange rate has gone, interest rate has gone, we want to change the toll. Then some politicians said, no, we won't agree. So it was in that circumstance we reached a deadlock. You can't increase toll. We can't fund this on these terms. This is in the contract. And then the next thing we did was, okay, how do we exit? And we went, there were exit clauses in the contract. And we went to those exit clauses and used them to shake hands across the table that, well, this is a deal we would have liked to do for a long time, but we can't fight. So maybe we can do another deal. And we left as friends. So some of the people who participated in that project are now showing interest in what we're doing again because they got a good deal. You must give them a way out if the deal doesn't work anymore. So there's so many lessons to be learned, but these things take time to negotiate, they take time to conclude, and they take time to bear. So all of the issues that we play with have economic consequences in negotiating PPPs.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister.
But it's a very long lesson.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. I said earlier that we're going to come back to the matter of movement of capital. And I will situate that in the context of my final question, which is about the poor, thinking about the poor when you begin to consider concepts for PPP. And in doing that, sir, I will speak very quickly to two stories. First is when you successfully launched the Lekki Ikoyi Bridge, Business Day was the only mainstream media that insisted that anyone who wanted to use that bridge must pay. And we had no apology in doing that. Secondly, 3 years ago, I was in Guangzhou in China, the most communist country in the world. And I did a few trips, as you would imagine, as a journalist. Every trip that I did out of my hotel that was 20, 25 minutes, the taxi I was in paid toll on a number of occasions on a single trip in China, the capital of communism. So my question, sir, is, as governments think about the poor and how to protect the poor, where do you think is the place for creativity in determining the poor and also determining the best way possible to protect the poor in evolving approaches to PPP?
Okay. First of all, as a human being, and as human beings, I'm not sure human behavioral science, very dynamic. Sometimes people want different things in the morning, and the same set of people change their mind in the afternoon and in the evening. So let's just say first, for me, infrastructure is so defining for addressing poverty. There are enough studies that have validated this. And that is why all across the world, I have not seen a new president in any part of the world during his campaign or on inauguration day in their speeches not talk about infrastructure. I can't remember one in a long time on inauguration day not talking about infrastructure and the plan to spend, because it is perhaps the most legitimate way to distribute wealth. So between when the bridge or the road is finished, there are several dozens of months or weeks or years in which daily money reaches a borrow pit. And Frank, as a borrow pit owner, just sits there. And every time a truck comes in, collects between 6,000 to 10,000 naira per 20-ton truck. Those are the rates in Nigeria today. You just collect every truck that comes, 6,000 to 10,000 naira for lateral alone. That does not involve the person driving it. That does not involve the person loading it. Those ones get 4,000 naira a day for labor. Those are the urban poor. And if they work for 6 days, that's 24,000 naira a day, a week, more than the monthly minimum wage. And then at those sites as suppliers, all sorts of supply and economic ecosystem going on around until iron rod, lubricants, cement, cross stones. So that is where the entire bottom of the pyramid of every economy really thrives, when there's construction. So that said, and of course, MSMEs too, small businesses, law firms, architectural firms, design firms, and so on and so forth. Everybody's involved there. So there's a benefit all through. At the end of the day, the quality of the adjoining land is already up by between 30 to 40% simply because infrastructure is provided. That adjoining land is owned by people, not by government. So some of those rural communities around which our highways traverse today, as we're building, there's capital appreciation for their land. And again, those are part of the people. This is the lifting of 100 million people out of poverty that the president talks about, because he understands infrastructure. And so it's not necessarily employing everybody, it's putting money in your hands. Then for the poor too, there's benefit in use of the infrastructure, travel time reduction, cost of goods and services, and this is money saved, not necessarily money that government gives to you, but it's money that government saves you because of improved efficiency. Let me go quickly and finally to the question that you raised about Guangzhou and this thing. And I think it raises a much more fundamental question about liberal democracy and its capacity to efficiently deliver development. It is a matter of great intellectual study now when you compare what is going on in liberal democracy in terms of functionality or dysfunctionality and the ability to build consensus across dozens, hundreds of participants in order to decide what is priority and what is choice. And therefore, you have seen, even in the management of COVID, the less liberal democracies have been much more efficient than the liberal ones, because something as basic as wearing a mask becomes a matter of fundamental right around which people are going to go to court. And compliance is then impeded at the risk of everybody's health and development. So, but let us understand also that China is not necessarily, the tolls there are not necessarily tolled by private sector, built by, they're essentially government-built routes, most of them. And now what they're doing, because I had this experience too, talking to some of the construction firms that work here, what the government has done over the years is to say, okay, now you take over the roads, manage them, and toll them after they had been built. And many of them are government-owned companies now doing business across the world using the platform of their China Exim loan to export technology, manpower, and machines across the world. So we can have the same thing, but we need to first spend the money, and we must find a way to spend, to raise the money. As I said, we missed many opportunities, not just the 2005 opportunity. There was a time oil was trading here for $120 per barrel. That is when our competitors, the Angolas of this world, the United Arab Emirates of this world, the Saudis of this world, invested a lot of their revenue, because it's extraordinary revenue, doesn't come every day, invested it in infrastructure, and they're better off for it today, in spite of the challenges we face we face in common.
Thank you very much, distinguished Honourable Minister. You said we would need to have conversations around building consensus. And for me, I think that is a very good place to end this conversation. I believe that, sometimes hunger or lack of excess wealth can also impose consensus, as I think it has in the case of the removal of petrol subsidies and the removal of electricity subsidy. But anyway, the matter of consensus, who should pay for infrastructure, the extent to which Nigerians are able and should be willing to pay for infrastructure will be a conversation for another day. Once again, Honourable Minister, we thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
I will now take the liberty, Honourable Minister, to switch on to my panel. A very interesting panel. My friend Bismarck Rewani, who is an economist and I dare say a serial presidential advisor. We also have Alhaji Diko, chairman of Itana PLC and also chairman of Infrastructure Bank. We have my very good friend Mobalaji Balogun, Chief Executive Officer of Chapel Hill Financial Advisors. And of course, we have Milian Gutovic, head of Middle East, Africa, and member of the Group Executive Committee of Lafarge Holcim. So let me welcome all of you to this very interesting conversation. I'm sure you were following my questions to the Honourable Minister, which we ended talking about who should pay for what when it comes to the matter of infrastructure. I will throw the first question at Milian. And I'd just like to ask you, given your very global experience, what are those global opportunities in PPPs that can be domesticated in a country like Nigeria? What approaches to PPP can you introduce us to that we can domesticate in Nigeria?
Thank you, Frank. So just to remind you, during my opening speech, I did mention that we estimate last year alone, there was close to $100 billion spent on PPP investments in developing countries. And this is a significant amount. And the projects ranged from few hundred million to few billion. And we as Lafarge Holcim have been participating in many of these projects on all 5 continents. The forms in which these projects were executed or delivered, they vary, but the typical one was design, build, and operate for 20, 30 years of the road, let's say, with a toll fee from, and then we had some mixed solutions with public financing or long-term concessions. Historically, I would like to say that the countries, mature countries like UK, Australia, Canada, and the US have been at the forefront in the PPP investments. And more recently, we are seeing in developing countries, in some countries in Eastern Europe, in India, in other countries in Asia, they are actually looking at the way that these investments were done in these mature countries, if I may say, countries like Australia, Canada, and US, and they are adopting the schemes, the initiatives to translate these best demonstrated practices from mature to developed countries. What we have also seen that PPP investment projects, they are mainly mostly in roads, approximately 40%, and Nigeria, obviously, in the next, in the years to come, needs to invest heavily in the road infrastructure. So there are many examples that we can translate using our internal, say us, Lafarge-Holcim, our internal expertise and experience that we can transfer from US, Canada, Australia to the local requirements. I think the best starting point would be to look at these countries' examples and schemes and adopt them to the local level. Then we need to think about, do we have a solid legal framework to accommodate PPP investment? And Nigeria already has examples. So obviously that's in the place. Then we need to think about, will the business be sustainable in long term? And when I look at them in Nigeria, I visited Nigeria several times. It's a growing country, growing population. So there will be road users for many years to come. So I think all these businesses could potentially be very profitable and very sustainable in the long term. And then the next thing we need to ask ourselves, can a country benefit from additional technical skills with the PPPs? Because PPPs, when we talk about PPPs, we often talk about roads and transportation, but we should be exploring energy, power plants, military facilities, and there are examples all over the world in these projects other than road and transport. So in the nutshell, yep.
Yeah, please finish.
So in the nutshell, my starting point would be we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are examples, there are good demonstrated practices all around the world, and we should learn from the people that have been doing this for many years. And don't spend time and money, energy on reinventing something new when we can learn from these countries and adopt that into Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Milian. Thank you, appreciate it. My next question will go to Alhaji Diko, who is chairman of the Nigerian Infrastructure Bank. Given that the bank is never going to be able to fund all of Nigeria's infrastructure need, what windows of opportunity are you opening or crystallizing for the private sector so that we can be able to bring in much needed private sector capital into infrastructure development in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much, Frank. First of all, let me again say I appreciate the invitation by Lafarge to be in this very, very esteemed group of actually not just thought leaders, but action people. Both are thinkers, but are also in their own right acting in various spaces to develop the Nigerian economy. It's really a great pride to be in this audience. Then moving specifically to your question, I first say that the infrastructure bank is not exactly a balance player. So having removed that conception, then we can know what sort of financing arrangement we bring to I was maybe at an opportune time I'll bring the background of why we came to be the infrastructure bank. But for now, let me specifically address the issue you have raised about funding. What we identified is that there are areas that specifically require funding in order to move PPPs and infrastructure forward in this country. One of those areas is in project preparation. There's a lot of resources and financial resources and time and efforts that are required to prepare a project for PPP. And a lot of expenditure is required by those who are promoting the project. And it's a very risky expenditure. So sometimes this is the major problem in Nigeria, that you need a lot to spend there, and not the providers of risk capital are not willing to expend on that project preparation. So what I'm doing is to talk to development partners And I hope eventually also the federal government will identify, understand that and come in. See that a project preparation fund is developed so that people who are desirous of independently starting an infrastructure project, or those who are working with government providers to do so, can access that fund in order to make sure that there is adequate preparation for every project before you even start concession negotiations and the rest, in order to make sure that once you reach financial closure, you have covered all the gaps that you need to cover. You have laid the foundation for a successful infrastructure project. We're talking to 2 multilateral agencies and some other fund providers outside the country, but we also believe that this is something that the federal government itself should be interested in, and hopefully the conversation will lead to that they participate in providing really a massive, a huge project preparation fund that people can access. That's one area. The second area is that we have actually approached the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have an approval actually to raise our first infrastructure fund. So we'll get investors into that, and that fund will be available to people who are doing an infrastructure project. But above all, our greatest asset is what we bring to enable people who are in this sphere access fund in the market. What we bring to the table is intellectual capital. Take a project from conception to financial close. Design it in such a way that those who have funds will feel comfortable to invest in those projects. And that's really, at the end of the day, the biggest financing arrangement we can bring on the table. So we start, whether it is government or private individuals that are doing this, we start at the beginning of the project, design the project, cover all the loopholes, cover every challenge that's along the way. So at the end of the day, by the time we have a financial close, we have a project that is attractive to investors who can see exit for their money. And that really is the key to success in this sphere. So I don't know if that's exactly.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. I'd like to ask our economist in the room, Bismarck, to just help dimension the importance of infrastructure building, especially for a country seeking to mitigate the impact or trauma of economic contraction. BJ.
Let me stand on existing protocols. I think it's important to see the context of infrastructure. And let us clear some myths and facts. What are the myths? The myths are that a multiplier, an investment multiplier, whether it's government or private sector, will have the same multiplier effect on output. 2, that gross fixed capital will always have a multiplier effect, and that the multiplier effect is always positive. That's the second myth. The third myth is that because you have achieved some growth, therefore everybody will benefit from that growth, that income is, kind of equally distributed. And so what's the issue? The issue is that I heard the minister, Honourable Minister, speak so eloquently about the things that are being done and how it was best to prioritize borrowing to invest as against debt forgiveness in 2003 and so on. Wow. So what is the issue is that we want to achieve a certain amount of growth, and that growth must be in excess of our population growth, and that growth should be inclusive and actually improve the standard of living of Nigerians. That's where I come to what they call the impact. So when we talk about we are raising money for infrastructure and so on, what's the impact on the people? Well, let's step back a little bit. We have an economy which is about $459 billion. We have gross fixed capital. We have personal consumption, which is 76% of the total GDP. And we have government consumption, which is only 5.6% of GDP. We have gross fixed investment, which is 21% of GDP. But the assumption that the gross fixed investment is generating a positive multiplier is a very generous assumption. And there's evidence, anecdotal evidence to show this, that at least 60% of all your gross fixed investment and infrastructure are what we call stranded projects, incomplete projects, which have guess what? It has a negative multiplier. Because you are paying interest on those loans, it is producing no job, it's not affecting total factor productivity. And so the economy is sinking. So all you need is a shock like COVID. All you need is a shock like Ebola. All you need is a shock like the previous recession, and you go into a tailspin. This is the danger that you're in. So how the thing to do today is to prioritize what you want to do, to optimize what you are doing, and then to execute efficiently. That is the situation that we find ourselves. So you can raise 200 billion of sukuk, but ask me, how many projects are you going to complete that can get people from A to Z? So how do we prioritize the completion of projects? How do we get private sector investment in and a positive multiplier effect to complete these projects? And how do we execute? And by the way, we are talking about infrastructure. Infrastructure is not just physical infrastructure. There's institutional infrastructure, right? And social infrastructure. The whole question about the police and SARS is, oh, that's social infrastructure. The judiciary is institutional infrastructure. The banking system is infra. So even if you have the bulk of fixed investment and gross fixed investment and physical infrastructure, if you don't have the institutional infrastructure to support it, if we cannot settle disputes, if I cannot remit my money when I want to, I cannot receive it, you will not have the outcome. The outcome is that we want growth. So we want to grow by double-digit growth, right? Far in excess, and then we can build, we get to the area of mass consumption, which is Russell's stage of takeoff and sustainable takeoff for that matter. Those are the things that I want us to address. So first and foremost, how do we get the $102 billion of fixed investment in Nigeria to get completed so that there's minimum stranded infrastructure? Two, how do we build on this so that it becomes at least 30 to 35% of GDP? Three, how do we use this as a vehicle for smoothing out income inequality and opportunity inequality, right? And four, more important than anything else, how do we build the social and institutional infrastructure, which is the police force, the judiciary, the central banks, the education system that will complement the physical infrastructure? Because you see governors going to open schools, going to open bridges. Bridges to where? Bridges to nowhere. So these are the things. How do we make sure that it will, you have, say, the monorail somewhere, which has been there for 15 years, which have not been completed. It's best to complete it, sell it out to a private partner who can complete it, and we will get the impact of that. Affordable housing. So I wanted to contextualize this so that we don't lose sight of what is the macroeconomic reality, one, and two, not to go in a different direction based on myths and things like which are not accurate. Thank you.
Yeah, BJ, I know you have to go off to somewhere, so I'm going to follow up with another question.
Yes.
If we were to get it right,
yes,
and we are building infrastructure as we should,
yes,
what would be the impact for an economy like Nigeria's?
Awesome. Let me tell you, you talked about the Lekki Expressway. Is that project complete?
Nope.
Okay, so 2005, today is 15 years, one stretch of 80 kilometers, or I don't know how many kilometers. We can't
83 kilometers.
83 kilometers. We cannot complete it. We have collected tolls, we've done everything. What is the problem? There's a bottleneck there. And you have to lead by example. So if that works, right, then other roads can be concession sold and you will complete the project. You need to have And if that road works properly, the traffic, the downtime, the traffic all the way from here to Ekpe to Djibouti, I like what the minister was saying about Dangote's project on the Oworonshoki Apapa or what have you road. For God's sake, let's complete the project so that people can start moving. Lagos Ibadan, let's complete the project. Right? Let's complete this project. We've been trying to open the rail between Lagos and Ibadan for the past 12 months or 2 years. For God's sake, let's open the part that is complete. Let's be moving. And so goods can move and people can move. It doesn't have to be the final solution, but I'm saying completion. That is why I said prioritization of what we want to complete, optimization of what we have, and execution so that we have an impact on total factor productivity. Because total factor productivity to Nigeria today in the first 5 years is minus 2.8. Labor productivity is also minus 2 point something. You cannot grow and sustainably without having positive total factor productivity. See how much is being spent in China. But look at total factor productivity in China compared to yours. Don't forget, 20, 30 years ago, our GDP per head was 4 times that of China. At independence, we're twice that of China. Today, they are 5 times ours, and with a big population. So what did they do? They control the population, but also boosted output. Their total factor productivity is over 8%. Yours is minus 2. So that's the answer to that question. Do things that will affect the total factor productivity. That is the efficient use of your capital stock. Your capital stock is high, it's negative, and you're paying interest on it. And besides that, you are also pillaging, and there are leakages. Leakages are negative to the output, while injections are positive. So you have the leakages, you have the idle stranded assets, and then you have the inefficient use of even the assets that have been completed. All of that leads to negative outcomes. That's why we are where we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, BJ. Thank you. Let me now turn to Bolaji. They talk about those who move the capital around, and I think it would be fair to say that you are one of them. Help us to just understand what is restraining private capital today from moving into infrastructure development in Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Frank. Please allow me stand on the existing protocols, and it's quite interesting that Lafarge has managed to gather a whole bunch of economists today, because aside from Bismarck, my brother Lamis, like myself, fundamentally comes from a basic training of economics. And I'd like to pick up that issue of total, factor productivity that Bismarck has just rounded up with, so that I can try to address some of the issues around the gaps that we appear to have. There are a number of realities, if I may start off, from where my brother, the Honourable Minister, ended, that we have to recognize in Nigeria. And the first of those is that if we take this year's budget, which is our largest ever budget, that budget basically translates to about 7% of Nigeria's GDP. So what does that mean? Very simply, it means that government as a factor of this economy is a small factor, and an increasingly smaller factor. The second issue is to recognize that inside of government's budget, only about 27% is going towards capital expenditure. And when you recognize that what the government calls capital expenditure is not all Minister Fashola's budget, but actually includes other things that the government is buying, like vehicles and computers across the entire government, you then need to go incisively into that number. And what you will find is that only about 0.25% of that CAPEX budget, in other words, 2% of GDP, or less than 2%, is what is actually going into infrastructure development. When we start from that premise, then we all must accept one reality, and that reality is that for us to successfully finance infrastructure and finance infrastructure in a way that our infrastructure financing is running substantially ahead, so that that total factor productivity, which Bismarck talks about, can become positive. We have to be increasing infrastructure spend probably by 20% or more a year. You know, I think it's in China, you know, that a very famous minister of Chinese development, Pei Yang, once said that only if we succeed in increasing infrastructure financing and investing by 15 to 18% per year, will we achieve the right level of development. When we understand that recognition, then the starting point is to recognize that we are going to have to attract private capital. I think one of the mistakes that we think about is to think of private capital as only PPP. PPP is only one facet of private capital that is available for development of infrastructure. For example, what China does today, which we do not understand and which we should be interested in, is a process of what you call corporatization. It's what city-states like Hong Kong and Singapore, for example, have done for quite a number of years, where they take a critical infrastructure asset, they put it into a corporate, well-governed structure, like a company like GT Bank, or like Zenith Bank, or like Lafarge or Dangote. They start off first and foremost issuing bonds in the capital markets, and you begin essentially the process of utilizing markets. And I put it to all of us that all of the solutions to Nigeria's economic problems are available inside of our financial markets. And that depth, you know, that Mr. Minister talked about, that appears not to exist, actually does exist, and substantially, in our capital markets. You start off issuing debt, then the next process is that when those projects get to a point, if they are economically viable projects, that they are generating cash flows sustainably, the government is able to sell down its equity. And what you will find is that in Beijing, as an example, Beijing has a number of listed entities that are listed in Hong Kong, providing infrastructure, right, in various assets. Beijing Water is a listed company in Hong Kong. A number of Beijing toll road companies, you know, the Metropolitan Rail, in other words, you know, the City Rail, you know, or the Light Rail is also listed in Hong Kong. So even in the most communist of countries, people are utilizing market solutions. Let me share one last factor, you know, with all of us that will interest you. Globally today, in asset managers, there's somewhere around $140 billion of assets under management. About 35% of that money today is being invested at negative yield. So in other words, it is earning zero or less. It is actually having to pay financial institutions to stay in those financial institutions. That capital is looking for a home. If you took just 0.25% of that number I've mentioned, in other words, $300 billion, you would finance all of the sustainable development goals, okay? For a country like Nigeria, but not even just Nigeria alone, you will probably substantially change this continent. So what is my message? It is going to require visionary leaders like my brother, Minister Fashola, and he started it off in Lagos State. And I had the benefit of working in his corner as a financial advisor, helping Lagos State firstly create a plan where first and foremost, if Lagos State basically issued a budget, 70% of his budget was going into capital expenditure and not going into salaries and debt service. if you start off from that premise where we begin to shift the basis, only then, yeah, can government really become an efficient transmission vehicle. Now, that is not an easy undertaking at the federal level. So when you understand that limitation, what you then have to do is we have to work across the limitation. And it's about collaboration with private capital. But it's for us to recognize that private capital comes in many more forms than PPP alone. And I think we have a unique opportunity. I think for the first time in our country's history, and probably since the early 80s in this country, everyone in every responsible position in government understands the importance of infrastructure to catalyzing shared development, to bringing prosperity, to lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And given that we have everybody's attention, I think there's no better time to make a difference.
You are muted. And Frank, if I may just interject.
Thank you very much.
If I may just interject.
Please.
I hope Bismarck and the minister is still somewhere listening.
I'm here.
Okay, now, I'd just like to say that in 1959, when Awolowo was exiting as the Western Region government, he stood up and he told the whole world that, and this is the model that is not still matched in Nigeria. And I'm going to go back. He went to Obakran, okay, brought MS Showale, the representative in Remo, the other member in Remo. He was the ambassador, Western Region ambassador in the UK. They brought him back in 1959 to establish the television station. And when he finished that, he came to Obakran and laid out all those companies, did the layout, brought in Blue Circle, brought in these people that make the roofings, brought all the companies that were there on the simple premise that we will give you land, we'll give you water, we'll give you electricity, we will give you tax reduction for so many number of years in exchange for, I think, 20% shares, okay? And this is what created the Odua infrastructure that we still have. When they got to our Ewekoro and built that plant, there was nowhere to put electricity there. They paid to bring electricity direct from Kanji, non-stop, into that factory. I hope, I mean, so these are everything that Bolaji has just said that they're doing in China has been done here before. And it's really, it's really what brought light into this place. It's what sent all of us to school. It is what allowed all of us as 18-year-olds to travel the world, because we had forebearers who could actually think ahead. And I think Lafarge is ready, really being in Nigeria, part and parcel of the initial creation of the success, really to do everything to support all the good thinkers, to support governments in order to reposition this country.
Thank you so much for that. We need a significant dose of inspiration. And I like the point you made about the fact that we don't have to go far away China to find examples of success. Let me ask Milia, what's the best approach for private sector in engaging with government, especially one that needs significant private capital infusion or injection like Nigeria? So when we talk about PPP, you get the understanding that we are still not on the same page, both those who have the private capital and the government, for instance. So how that handshake, what's the best way to make it happen, given your experiences across the world?
So going to something that I briefly mentioned in the first question that you asked me, I think there are a few fundamentals that we need to keep in mind in order to marry this government and private sector. As I mentioned, solid legal framework is an essential in order for the governments worldwide, not only Nigeria, to attract this private investment. And as I said it, at least that is my understanding, in Nigeria, we do have a legal framework that can support this marriage between public and private partnership. Also, private investment needs to be justified. We need to ensure that these companies will have sustainable business in the years to come. As we said, someone said it rightly, this is a long-term commitment that goes 10, 20, 30 years, and therefore it is essential that that business will generate enough money for these companies to stay alive and to make it attractive for them to invest even more in the future. And I think for the other big point is that about the technical skills. You do recall that the public-private partnership outside transport and roads needs some specialized skills when it comes to the energy power plants, when it comes to the military facilities, and then government everywhere, they need to attract right level of expertise, and this expertise will come from these private companies. So few fundamentals need to be addressed in order to ensure a good marriage between public and private, between government and private investments in the countries.
Millian, thank you very much. Now, when I talk to private investors, I hear two things about infrastructure in Nigeria. One is the one that the minister spoke eloquently about capital, the size of capital, private capital that is available in Nigeria. I'm going to leave that to Bolaji and Bismarck to address. The other point that I hear from investors is access to the assets. And I'm going to be addressing my next question to Alhaji Diko. Presumably, we have a very long gestation period from taking assets from government and putting it into a commercial structure that is able to attract the capital that it needs for it to happen. People talk, for instance, that if you were dealing with the Infrastructure Regulatory Commission and you have everything you require, from start date to get-go, it will take anything from 3 to 5 years or possibly more, or may never happen. What is your experience, Alhaji, and what would you advise in terms of how government can ease access to these critical assets, infrastructure assets that need to be developed?
Well, thank you very much, Frank. Well, let me at the onset say I do not think it's been fair to say that ICRC, the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, delays issues for so long. My own experience is that they have actually acted speedily when issues are presented to them. The problem is not at the ICRC. The problem is at various MDAs, ministries and departments. We have not done enough to build capacity and an understanding of what the issues are. I think the major thing that we need to do is to identify, at least in the first instance, those ministries and departments that have assets that are candidates for PPP and private capital. Ministry of Work, Ministry of Housing, Ministry of Power, Ministry of Transport. To identify those and ensure that there is an aggressive effort to build capacity in those areas. And it's been done before at a micro level. Everybody has said what Lagos State has done. And my own reading is that actually between 1999 to 1970 to 2007, a lot of effort had gone in Lagos, not just building capacity, but also designing the appropriate framework, institutions, and infrastructure to promote public-private partnership. So I think it's one thing we need to do at the federal level, create that situation that ministries are adequately prepared in terms of capacity building to play in this sector. The second thing that we need to do is to make sure, okay, at the same time that there is also an aggressive public awareness program. Some of the things the ministers can do well, but if the public opinion tries to undermine those efforts, we go back to the same problem. So there must be from the government and even the private sector an effort to create awareness in the public that really the way to go if we're going to build infrastructure in this country is the PPP and the private capital model. So I think that is the first thing that needs to be done to ensure that there is awareness in the public, but also capacity. The private sector will deal with itself. Trust me. I had building on what Millian said. If anybody is going to put their money, they will have the capacity to do it. They will make sure that they are and they acquire. So there isn't much, but in terms of the public and the public institutions, we need to do a great deal more in order to do that. I hope.
I will follow up with another question, Alhaji. The matter of protecting the poor and the conversation that the Honourable Minister alluded to. I find even among the elite in Nigeria, the lack of desire to pay for infrastructure. How do we begin to create that awareness that you refer to? Isn't there a role for government, as it were, in helping to make Nigerians start thinking differently about the cost and funding of infrastructure?
Okay, let me do some declaration. I'm an ex-communist. But actually, I share a different view on what you have said. For me, the experience of the last 20 years is that Nigerians are ready and willing to pay for service if it's available. And I'll give you two practical examples.
Please.
One is everything that everybody knows. I mean, those of us who are old enough to know what it is to use NITEL.
Yes.
And what it is today to have telephone services. Nigerians have demonstrated that if there is available, they will pay for it. Of money people spend on their recharge card at all levels.
Yes.
It's high. But there's something also, another example. I know in my village, but I also see it's happening everywhere. We don't have pipe-borne water everywhere in this country. Have you ever stopped to imagine the amount of money people spend on those who carry jerry cans of water and sell every morning? Every morning, household in my village in the city, they know that somebody is going to bring a jerry can of water. 3 jerry cans will be enough for them. They are ready to pay for it. What they pay for it for every month is greater than the amount they would have been paying if water is flowing through their taps.
I agree.
So the assumptions that people are not willing to pay for service is wrong. If there is service, people will pay for it. Even the toll. One of my friends said, okay, listen, if people are not used to paying for something, you ask them to pay. That's an attitudinal thing. But imagine you are doing a road. If you go on an old road and say, pay for toll, people will complain. But build a new road and make their journey faster. People will go on that new road and pay every kobo that is required, I promise you. So sometimes we create these thoughts in our mind, and that's why I started as I'm an ex-communist who believe everything should be free. But now I see that actually people who require service are ready and willing to pay for it if we are ready to provide it.
A wonderful confession of an ex-communist. Let me turn to the other economists in the room. and I'm here.
I also went to
about...
a communist school.
I meet people like Alaji who, and I think that should apply to all of us. Life must mean constant learning, and as we learn, our perspectives change as well. So that's life. The day we stop learning, we are dead. The point that I want to raise with Bolaji and Bismarck is about, is it that there isn't capital in Nigeria to crystallize infrastructure development, to start the process? Or is it just that we are not doing a good job at accessing that capital? When we talk about pension assets of $23 billion or 11 trillion. So please, on what side of the divide are you here? Okay. Any of you can start.
So Bismarck, do you want to go?
No, let me very quickly, let me just tell you what it is. Capital is looking for where it can be well deployed and where it can get a decent return, right? Based on the infrastructure that you have. But more importantly is the fact that you must be in a position to determine your pricing. As long as the pricing mechanism, and you've got to believe that the invisible hand, right, is more efficient than the hidden hand. What you have is a hidden hand where you are trying to say you are deregulating while in fact you are not deregulating. But that hidden hand has to be substituted with the invisible hand, which is the efficient market hypothesis. Until you have capital is playing around, trying to look for where it can determine its revenue, its pricing, and therefore it will deploy more capital. As long as you don't have that, then you would have a problem. That's what's happening in your power sector. That's what's been happening in your downstream sector. That's what's happening to a large extent in the refining, which is midstream. Once you allow people to determine their prices, they will factor, it doesn't matter what the exchange rate, it doesn't matter. They will get a return on investment. And the return on investment gives them so it satisfies that store of value. And one point I want to make is that there's an understanding that capital and investment equals savings. If you don't have national savings, you will not have optimal investment. You cannot have national savings if your inflation rate is 13.5% and your interest rate on risk-free assets is 2%. That inflation differential has to be covered. So these are some fundamental things. This is not a rocket science. This is just a question of policymakers doing what they believe in, and I think that we are seeing that. But in the past, and some of the current, there are a lot of people that are involved in intellectual dishonesty. Let me put it this way, people believe in their own lies. Now, therefore, we need to correct that and make sure that that momentum happens. When it happens, you find capital. Dangote came into this country and has put so many billions of dollars in cement, put billions of dollars into petroleum. He wouldn't have put money into cement if he couldn't determine the price of cement. He would not be putting money into petroleum and citing it here if he doesn't have a control over the pricing of his petroleum products. The same thing happens with petrochemicals, the same thing happens with fertilizer. You've got to allow the investor to determine their price. The market will punish you. If your price is too high, they will go to another product because you have that competition. That you can't be taking the question of capital optimization in isolation of the pricing model, in isolation of the settlement of remedies and disputes, all of this. And finally, the question of that Bolaji raised, you cannot, the level of money, you have 380 billion naira or so, or 400 billion budgeted for housing and works. That's $1 billion. What is that? You can't scratch this up. If you want to build infrastructure through the government route, you have to do times 10 of that. You have to do $12 to $15 billion every year. Then you can complete the roads, then you can do things. You can't be giving, sprinkling money and thinking that projects will be completed. What we are seeing is sprinkling, right? So that's how I end this. Thank you.
Thank you, BJ. So what I get from BJ, and this is now to Bolaji, is that there is some capital, at least to start with, and which can be like a catalyst. But BJ emphasizes the point about the ability of the owner of capital to price his goods and services. So Bolaji, what should government do to unlock this private capital?
Frank, it's always been about that, and I'm just going to tell us all a story. I'm going to contrast Nigeria's mobile telecoms industry with Nigeria's attempts at power privatization. Yes. So in January 2001, 3 companies won mobile licenses in this country. I happened to be at the leadership of one of those companies. We had 6 months, first and foremost, to launch mobile networks in this country, okay? We delivered mobile networks, every single one of us, in 6 months. The only operator that won a license that failed to do so was the government, okay? Then we sat down and the regulator wanted to start fixing tariffs. And I led, as a young man then, the industry conversation with the regulator, and that regulator today, because he behaved with a lot of maturity and with really a lot of commercial pragmatism, is the chairman of MTN Nigeria today, Ernest Ndukwe. We sat with the regulator at that time and said, in a country in which we have 460,000 lines, and you have millions of people who want access to telecommunications, it doesn't matter what the price is, okay? Let us make the investment, let us set the tariff, let us bring the service, and competition will fix the price. It took all of 2.5 years for every single thing that we said to that regulator to come to pass. The very first thing that happened was when we started off with connections at $300 and nobody was buying a line. Nobody taught us to reduce the price in September 2001 to $100. By Christmas of that year, we were selling connections at $10. By June of the next year, a mobile connection in Nigeria was free. All of us inside the operators thought we were going to die. But guess what happened, right? This market, which just keeps giving and giving, just through millions and millions of subscribers at us. Then the regulator came and the regulator said, your tariffs per minute are too high. You're charging 50 naira per minute. And we said, we can't reduce those tariffs. Then a gentleman called Mike Adenuga got the 4th license and announced 6 months before he launched that he was going to come with per second billing. Very, very quickly, all of us recognized that we had to ensure a welcome plan. Tariffs came down. The result today is a sector which has invested more than $2-3 billion every year consistently for 19 years. And that's why today we have 203 mobile connections in Nigeria. Compare that to the electricity industry, where people who have invested capital are simply asking the government to allow them charge market reflective tariffs. And we are worrying about the people cannot afford it. Guess what? When they buy a diesel generator today, they are paying more than 6 times that market reflective tariff today. This issue is probably one of the most fundamental impediments to investment capital coming. And once we understand this, and we are not, I trained, in the most communist, of economics schools, the LSE, okay? And the one thing you will realize ultimately is that whether you like it or not, markets work everywhere. And markets have an incredible way of self-regulating themselves, and government simply needs to create an enabling environment, stand there ready to regulate if people behave improperly, but allow competition deal with it. That is our big opportunity.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you. I will see whether we have time for more questions, but I wanted to go to Millian and just ask my last question of him to just help us to outline advantages of doing concrete roads as against asphalt surfacing. What has been your experience around the world?
So as Lafarge Holcim, we operate in both areas, in asphalt and also in concrete. And in asphalt, we are very active in UK and US, but concrete, I must say, we are probably doing across 80 countries worldwide. From my experience and what I have seen in the other countries, there are few areas where I found concrete roads to be more effective in comparison to the other types of the roads we are seeing. Under heavy and intense traffic, concrete roads usually have a higher life expectancy, and they have a generally longer durability with less maintenance required. Also, our testing internally and also what we have seen in real life is suggesting that concrete roads offer a much better resilience to climate extreme events such as flooding, heavy rains, tornadoes, and of course, extreme temperatures, either minus or plus. In Europe, for instance, concrete roads are becoming much more attractive simply because they light in color in comparison to asphalt roads, and they offer a significantly better reflection to the sun. So therefore, they're not capturing as much heat as asphalt roads do. In general, for a country like Nigeria, where we have some extreme weather conditions during the rainy seasons, and where we need to have roads which are stronger and more durable, our recommendation would be to go with the concrete roads.
Interesting. Thank you very much. There are quite a number of questions that have come in, but I'm not exactly sure how much time we have to take these questions. We were meant to have ended this conference at 3:45. It's 3:59, and we still have to just round up before we go. I'm not exactly sure whether the Honourable Minister is still with us. I know his connection is still there, I can see it, but I don't know whether he's hearing us, because I wanted to ask whether he has. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
He's hearing us. The minister is with us.
Thank you. I wanted to ask whether he has any closing comments as we bring the session to a close. I think I would rather do that instead of asking him a question.
No, I just wish to say that all of the interventions have helped to sharpen, I believe, the focus that I think is necessary in terms of the need to build a consensus around accelerated investment on multiple platforms in infrastructure. Clearly, from the thesis of Bismarck and the analysis of Bolaji, they show clearly, as I sought to highlight, that our competitors are investing a larger proportion of their GDPs in infrastructure. And that is what we must seek to do if we want to be like them. If we want to live the quality of life they live, we must do what they have done. And so we must have the consensus to raise the money, not only by way of investment, but also by way of public expenditure. And it's going to discomfiture some people. There will be concerns raised about borrowing, and those concerns should not be dismissed, as I've said. But should they elevate to worries? I think not. because they are going into assets that we can all see, assets that we can buy at today's price. Because if we choose to wait until another oil windfall or other windfall comes, really and truly, the pain can be even much more pervasive. So I just think that Lafarge Group and the Business Day Group and the partners have done well in convoking this first meeting, and I hope that it is something that we can engage and keep and come to report also progress, because talk is easy, but getting the work done is a real deal, that we can come to measure progress, how much more capital has come in and so on. So thank you once again for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. We have a question from one Stephen Miner, who's interested in knowing your views about handing over federal roads to state governments.
Well, there's a historic and legislative perspective to this. Nigeria currently has a little over 200,000 kilometers of road network. Of that road network, the federal government is responsible for 35,000 kilometers of it. The remaining 165,000 is the responsibility of the state governments and the local governments. Let me put that in perspective for you. Within every state of Nigeria, just let us do a sampling. How many people have their livelihood dependent on whether they can cross to the next state or whether they can cross from their local government to the next? Federal roads connect states. So if you are not going to Abuja, if you are not going to Ibadan, for example, you have no business ordinarily, or to Ogun State, you have no business ordinarily with, in Lagos Ibadan Expressway. But you have every business with the road that takes you from Apapa to Ijora, and you heard Frank talk about his Okada experience. So have those states themselves and the local government, then you have roads that lead right to your door. Have those roads been done? And which are those roads which impact more or not? So everybody is focusing on the federal roads, but the roads that are most important are the roads that take us to work and back, not the roads that take us from state to state.
Precisely.
As important as they may be.
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister. Let me thank my panelists, Alhaji Lamis Diko. Let me say thank you to Milian Gutovic, Mr. Bolaji Balogun, Bismarck Rewani, but also, most importantly, let me thank Honourable Minister, not only for delivering the keynote address, but enduring my questions, but also staying for the entire length of the session this afternoon. On behalf of Lafarge Africa, I would like to thank you all, including our audience. We have seen some people connect to us and ask questions from as far away as Chicago in the United States. We hope that this has been an interesting and an engaging conversation for you. As the Honourable Minister said, this is only a start for which we are grateful to Lafarge. Clearly, there will be more conversations ahead. What is important is that Nigeria is a large market for infrastructure. There is absolutely no question about that, given the size of our population and given the size of our economy, which is today estimated at about $460 billion by way of GDP. There is some capital, at least. We have referred to the $23 billion held administratively largely in treasury bills and government bonds. So there is some capital that can start and crystallize a massive infrastructure build out. If we enthrone smart regulation that allows clean, commercially negotiated assets to assets that is held by government, and perhaps more importantly, if we encourage the owners of capital to charge fair and market rates for their services, we will begin to see a turnaround in terms of infrastructure build-up. Bismarck Rewane has helped to dimension how important this will be in terms of crystallizing an inclusive, fair, flourishing economy for Nigeria. But as I said earlier, this is only a start. Let me once again thank Lafarge Africa for being at the forefront of this, and to hope that we will have them, lead many more conversations in the months and in the years ahead.
Okay.
So distinguished Honourable Minister, board members of Lafarge, my panelists and the audience, I thank you very much, and God bless Nigeria.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.